Bulldog is off today. It is always a treat to welcome Matt Waldman to the show, footballguys.com, the rookie scouting portfolio. Matt happens to have at least one of his fantasy teams named one of my favorite names of all the people I play against, the RSP Murder. And there's that crow, Matt, right there on your Twitter bio. What's the fascination? What's the origin story on the crows?
Oh, that's a long story, but the short one I'll just say is that crows are kind of like the scouts in nature. You know, they recognize faces. They kind of inform on their on the rest of their murder. I guess what they call a pack of crows, and let them know that like who's dangerous and who's not. They're problem solvers, and we often talk about them from a humble standpoint of like when you screw up, you eat crow.
Yeah.
So, a lot of that has a lot to do with what I do for a living. So
very good. Just the mere term murder is evocative enough, right? The image of a crow and then the murder word there. Like you're already starting at a great an advantage there.
Like you said, what's my degree? You had that intro with what's the degree in kicking ass and taking names. I'm trying to earn my PhD in fantasy in that regard.
Well, Matt is one of the finest analysts combining both expert film study with his fantasy acumen. Let's just start, if I may, Matt, with from you an overview of the Bills' offseason. If you want to limit it to offense, that's fine. There's really very little different personnel-wise about their offense, but okay, they scored 30 points a game. They ran for 30 touchdowns and threw for 30 touchdowns. 30 is the operative number, I guess. What's sort of your expectations for them?
Yeah, I think more of the same. Let's just get a little bit more refined. I mean, I think they're looking at this as a multi-year process. I think with Joe Brady's system, they wanted Josh Allen to spread the wealth and not be linked to just one guy and get a little bit too all in on one primary option. So they gave him a golf bag full of different clubs. You got Keon Coleman, what he can do after the catch and at the catch point downfield at the boundary, and what he can do in the middle of the field as a runner. You've got Shakir and what he does after the catch. And while he can do some of what Coleman does, he's not as physical, obviously, so they don't want to put him in those scenarios, but let him get yards after the catch and run and be able to create. And then, looking at guys like Palmer, Palmer's a little bit a tweener. He can do a little bit of both if you needed him to be that. So I think they created a little bit more redundancy in their receiver room. And then along with, Knox and Concaid, you've got guys who can do a little bit after the catch and give you some up the seam. And they want to create good spacing to allow Josh Allen to make good decisions and limit interceptions. And he's done that very well. And with James Cook, I think the priority was let's be patient and figure out how we can get this contract right. We knew that it was going to take us a little bit of time. We hoped maybe we could get it done in the spring. Didn't quite work out that way. But don't worry, folks, it's going to happen, and it did. So now it's more about letting Coleman maybe be able to blossom fully into becoming the player that they envisioned when they drafted him, and seeing if he's a little bit more comfortable, and getting Joshua Palmer probably into the mix and Elijah Moore possibly into the mix off the bench when they need him. But just really do what they did in Brady's offense in year two with a little more sophistication, being able to be better at identifying disguises and coverage and being able to foil them and to create things where they have mismatches against defenses in ways that maybe they couldn't do that quite as fast as we hear all the time when, the talking heads talk about, Caleb Williams is going to need multiple years to master his offense in Detroit. In Chicago. Well, Jared Goff needed multiple years, but his first year he threw for 4,000 yards. Or for 4,400 yards. So, again, it takes multiple years to learn the offense the way they want the players to, but you can see what Josh Allen did in year one. So, they're just going to build on it.
It can take multiple years, but I guess if you're Jared Goff or Caleb Williams and we're the first overall pick, you'll get multiple years, right? You'll get at least two. Williams will get at least this year.
Yeah, for sure. And but it's funny because you got the back. I call it the backup quarterback fraternity. They're skilled guys, but they're kind of like folks at the post office. They're used to doing things one way. And they're also there to get clicks. So when they start talking about he's going to need years to overcome a decade of bad habits, or he's going to need, years and multiple years to master an offense. Well, yeah, most quarterbacks do. But if it creates a little bit more buzz in the media to get your attention from whatever you're eating in that sports bar, above the den of TVs, that's what's going to happen. So, I mean, Allen is already good. We already know what he's done. Joe Brady's offense, I mean, people were probably worried that losing Stephon Diggs and what that was going to do, but it looks like, the way that that's worked out, the spreading the wealth thing has worked for the Bills, and they're going to try and build on it.
With Matt Waldman, specific to Coleman, may I ask you just to elaborate on what it is you think maybe he needs to work on the most? Like, how do the Bills and Coleman get to a happy place, which is, of course, what they want? I mean, he's the first pick of the second round last year. They're trying to win a championship. And for all the different analysts we've talked to all summer, Matt, Coleman is easily the number one answer for, like, all right, well, who on the Bills offense, if anyone, do you expect to pop? And I get Coleman way more than Concaid, for one. So how much potential do you see for that to happen, whatever that, how you'd want to define that? And what will it have to take?
I don't think anyone's going to pop in this offense at the level that people expect. I don't think you're going to see a 1,000-yard receiver on this offense. And I think that's, for people who are hoping that Coleman becomes that, I don't think the design is going to encourage that. Because really what Coleman does so well is what we've talked about in the past at pre-draft, which is being able to win contested targets. But if you're in an offense where they're trying to diminish the amount of contested targets you actually throw, then you're not really leaning too hard on a player's athletic ability. Because, I mean, if you ask me, I look at there are three players in this receiving core who, if they played in another system, would probably be getting a lot more fanfare around the country if they were able to earn some of those contested shots. And that would be Coleman. It would be Khalil Shakir, because we've seen it in isolated instances when before the Joe Brady offense, where when he was just starting to get playing time, that they'd throw him open and he would make some tough plays, like that Pittsburgh play in the playoffs against Pittsburgh, where they threw it over the middle and he made a beautiful catch. He used to do that all the time in college. And then Dalton Kincaid, where I think that he honestly, I mean, for the Bills' sake, you would like to see him continue to be used the way he's being used. But in that, if you're going to say, if there's a player who's a little bit in jail, and you'd like to say free that guy's game up, it would be Dalton Kincaid. Like, as a guy who lives down here in Atlanta, if Kyle Pitts doesn't work out, I would love for Atlanta to bust him out of Buffalo and let Michael Penix, who is great at throwing people open, have Kincaid, who he can deliver balls like that. But it's just that Kincaid's not used that way because the offense wants to use him in the flats. They want to use him more after the catch. And the biggest strength of his game at Utah was going up and getting the football. And I've just never really seen Josh Allen really make an effort to target him that way. And I think that's a function of the offense, not Josh Allen, because you look around and you don't see it as often with Coleman. You don't see it as often with Shakir. It's about, look, we're not favoring one guy. Just get to the open dude. And that's great for Josh Allen, and it's great for the offense. And look, it's a team game, so that works out great. But if you're going to look at Coleman, I think Coleman's more of a 700 to 800-yard receiver this year. Maybe gives you the lead in receiving touchdowns because of what he can do in isolated situations where they might try to let him go up and get it in, on some vertical shots occasionally or some red zone shots. But I think that really, if you're going to say, what's it going to take for these guys to really take that next step? I think it's going to take a different offense, and that doesn't help the team.
You're right. As the names have been invoked here, this is where I point out that Kincaid is a year older than Kyle Pitts, by the way. Although Pitts' career is 1, if not 2 years older, but Kincaid is a year older. Who says no? Matt Waldman on the West Her Hotline. Well, we talked about James Cook this offseason, Matt, more than any other player here because of his contract stuff. This is meant to sort of be both a player and a fantasy question, but 2 rushing touchdowns to 2 rushing touchdowns to 16 rushing touchdowns. Yikes. I have read from you in fantasy that I think, if I'm not wrong here, you're comfortable with Cook at the 2-3 turn, which is earlier than he usually goes. So that's interesting to me. And just like what you see in this player, the Bills made what seems like sort of the obvious investment in him financially, just kind of a middle ground from what we had heard he wanted and what, they were paying him already based on his production seemed to fit nicely. How valuable is he here?
I think he's quite valuable. I mean, looking at, I think the Bills and Cook both mutually understood, look, Cook's like, I want to stay here. I mean, I'm on a winning team, and I'm getting to be the lead back on a winning team. And sure, Ray Davis is a fine teammate, and he can give a little bit more of a power element than I can. But, I've shown that I can get enough volume to work between the tackles, and that you're going to use me in the red zone, and that you can use me in the passing game. And where else am I going to go and have a quarterback the caliber of Allen and the organization this caliber? So I think that's a good thing. And then from a fantasy standpoint, while he's not my ideal target at the 2-3 turn, like I'm looking at guys like Devontae Adams, who I think is a bargain at that range, and I tend to go receivers probably second and third overall. But if I find myself in a situation where I think my build is good to go with, I could somehow get Derrick Henry and Christian McCaffrey back to back, which I have earlier in the summer. Honestly, with those two, I feel like I could screw up the next 4 picks and still be a decent contender. But if I just get one of those and then I decide that maybe I want to go 3 running backs overall and Cook is there as my third running back, I'm taking that all day, because I think there's enough value at receiver to make that bet in a league where you start 3 running backs. So, I mean, Cook, to me, I've always been a believer that there's so many ways to be successful as a running back in terms of body type, athletic ability. As long as you have good feet, you see things developing, and you understand how to manage the game within the scope of the blocking scheme that's in front of you and the down and distance. And Cook has all that. So, he's so quick, and he's slippery, and he understands, like Jamal Charles did, to really, attack first in between the tackles or in physical situations, so that you can be the one to dictate the chain of events that follow. And sometimes you can hit a bigger guy and set up a move because you understand the combinations of how to attack. And he does that pretty well. I don't know if I'd say he does it as well as Jamal Charles, but with that, with the lanes that he's getting and with the way that he can create, he's a very good back. If Jamal, I would say Aaron Jones is probably one of the most well-rounded guys who can give you, power, speed, quickness, receiving ability. He's in that neighborhood, I always joke when I do comparisons that he's a middle class this or that. But he's probably in the same subdivision as Aaron Jones, but maybe not in the back of the neighborhood where the biggest houses are.
Middle class or diet Aaron Jones, you hear that sometimes. Arbitrage. Yeah. Hearing you mention Jamal Charles, Matt, this isn't really so much for the current conversation, but most guys couldn't do most things as well as Jamal Charles. Who, just random question out of left field here, thinking about him and running backs as well as you speak on the subject, who is maybe your favorite running back to think about, to watch, analyze, going back, what's Jamal Charles, 10, 15 years ago, or even currently? Is there somebody here at this broad question that I'm forcing on you that immediately would be somebody you'd want to talk about and answer this question with?
Yeah, I can give you a couple I'll give you 3 that come to mind. Charles certainly is one of them, because he fits what a scat back should look like in terms of how to run between the tackles with the attacking nature that I told you about, being able to, lower a shoulder into a defensive tackle if he's square to you, but being able to set up the spin off of it so that you're hitting him first, so before he can grab you, you've already slipped away. And there's a lot of other things about him that are great. But the guy who scouts and trainers and people I trusted who were in the league, who when I was learning this game mentioned who was probably the teaching tape for running backs, even long after his prime was over, is Frank Gore Jr.'s daddy.
Oh,
Frank Gore is maybe not, the fastest, the biggest, but he is so sophisticated in how well he sets up runs with his footwork, with his patience, how tight he can really press a crease. And I've shown some things on my site, the difference between, say, aging Frank Gore in Indianapolis and Marlon Mack in Indianapolis running the same play. And I've also shown one of where Frank Gore runs a play that looks like it's trouble, and Anthony McFarland running the same play and getting the same type of trouble, and seeing how old Frank Gore gets 15 yards and how Anthony McFarland gets stuffed in the backfield. So his ability to really set up runs and read the field. Frank Gore is, to me, like Nick Chubb's dad. Okay, like Nick Chubb would be on that list too. And then I think the best running back I've ever seen, at least for a period of time in the past 20 years, maybe 25, let's say 25 years, the best running back that I like to watch, and I'll go back and watch his tape when I can, is the first 2 years of Edgerrin James. Edgerrin James' ability to drop his weight and be so sudden in and out of cuts, but have the power and the pad level, even the post-injury Edgerrin James with the Colts in short yardage, which is really a very difficult thing to be able to do well. His ability to get lower than his man was always a saving grace. But I think Edgerrin James could have been one of the best backs of all time if he had stayed healthy and didn't have that devastating knee injury that changed the way that he ran a little bit. Still a very good back, obviously, a Hall of Famer, but I think he would have been a record-breaking runner based on the first 2 years that he had in the league, because he could do it all. And then one guy that, if you're an old-timer like me,
let's go,
or supposedly is William Andrews out of Atlanta.
Wow.
Walter Payton once got interviewed in Sport Magazine, who would he block for in the league if he was a chance to block for anybody. And he said, well, Matt Suhey, because he was my fullback. He said, but the other guy is William Andrews, because I just love the way he plays. He was one of the first backs to get 2,000 combined yards, and he did it 2 years in a row before Roger Craig. And he literally laid the wood to Ronnie Lott a couple of times in some highlights you can find on YouTube. And he was blocking for Joe Cribbs at Auburn.
Yes.
At that time. So William Andrews, if you never heard of him, go watch some William Andrews, because that dude was insanely good, but he had an ACL tear mid-career. And he had nerve damage in his toe, and was literally just running a play on grass in summer camp, and he forever changed his career. But he was, and then some of his stats were on par with guys like Barry Sanders and the top end runners in the league during the time that he was in his prime.
Love it. No worries if our younger listeners don't know who that is, but as it happens, Matt, if people were listening yesterday, they heard his name on this show yesterday too. Because Sal Capaccio, our beat reporter, and I were talking, and we got to the subject. We're talking about uniforms, these rivalry uniforms and throwbacks and everything. And Sal just happened to mention the Falcons are wearing their 80s, I guess, uniform, the red helmets, when they play the Bills this year. And he asked me, who do you think of when you think of that uniform? I said, William Andrews. And so,
good taste.
There's a streak going here. William Andrews, welcome back to the show today. Just to close on fantasy here, Matt, like you've mentioned a couple of strategies already, and you can read Matt at footballguys.com. What's your perfect start? Like where you'd want to be picking, and just sort of your basic 12-team PPR format.
Sure, and if you want to find some more of this work, I have a draft plan at footballguys.com where I do 2 iterations of it, and I show you when I pick early, from the middle of the draft, and at the end of a order, and I do it for 1 QB and 2 quarterback leagues, and I give you different options of what I'm doing in players I like, but also alternate picks, so you can kind of mess with your builds. But I always like picking at the end. I always like picking at 11th or 12th. I feel like I see the board best from that range. And because of the fact that Derrick Henry is sitting there late, and often a guy that I can get because people are worried about his age, just like they were last year. But I like running back, like a running back with a great offensive line who is generally a safe player because he's skilled and has a great offensive line and usually a good passing game to also complement it. And I could do that early. Then I'll go with wide receivers, for the next 3 to 4 picks. As a result of that, and I feel like that I can get good players that way, and then I can go with a block of running backs, that some people call the dead zone for running backs, and they don't, they're worried about that. But you can get young talent like a Caleb Johnson. You can often get at that range, or a David Montgomery, who people look at David Montgomery and they're sitting there going, well, Jahmyr Gibbs is the guy to have, but Jahmyr Gibbs going out for more passes might actually make him more sacrificial than actually productive. And a lot of people are kind of missing that. I think he'll still be very good, but you can get a guy like Montgomery, and he's going to be getting red zone touches and closeout touches behind a good offensive line, or Aaron Jones combined with Jordan Mason. Everybody's poo-pooing that in the way of saying that, well, Mason's going to take a lot of touches, but I would dare say Aaron Jones as a receiver and a runner is a better player than Jahmyr Gibbs, just older. And he's always gotten it done, even when he's been in committees in Green Bay. And if they decide they're going to, use him a little bit more like Jahmyr Gibbs, well, he was Jahmyr Gibbs before Jahmyr Gibbs, if you ask me, just didn't have the system to do it. So if I can land him as well and have a Derrick Henry, David Montgomery, and an Aaron Jones and take some chances later, I can get a bunch of receivers, and then I can take chances on guys like Caleb Williams, or I can go with the safe pick of Brock Purdy or Jared Goff in the 8th or 9th round and take a chance on some of the later tight ends. Like, to me, Pat Freiermuth is hilariously low right now because everybody's worried about Jonnu Smith, but the Steelers have said he's the heartbeat of the offense, and with Russell Wilson, he was on track for an 8 or 9 touchdown season. And with Aaron Rodgers, I think you're going to see him actually lead the Steelers in touchdowns this year, not DK Metcalf. I think he's going to be the touchdown leader because of how good he is as a contested catch player. And I could get a guy like him and Colston Loveland and get, Freiermuth in like 15th, 16th round. And that's pretty nice. And I feel like if there's a position that you can kind of take risks with, that's the one. So why not?
I'm drafting tight end premium all the time, and he won't even get picked. Last night I did a 350 stakes league, and 30 tight ends got picked, and he was not among them, Freiermuth. So that's a really good take. Well, covered a lot of ground here. Always love talking to you. Dalton Kincaid is older than Kyle Pitts, but younger than Tyler Shuck. So remember that as we part here, Matt. Whatever that's worth to you.
And he's probably going to have a better season than both of them. We'll find out.
I would think. Certainly than Shug, probably. Thanks again, Matt. Enjoy your Labor Day weekend and the season, of course.
You too, fellas.
Thank you. Matt Waldman on the West Her Hotline. We'll take a break here. Look